Do you agree that, it's time that we all wake up and take responsibility, even for our ancestors that did not know any better?
Been waiting patiently to have this kind of conversation. Hello, it's Wake Up with KC, and today I want to talk about, have you ever traveled around the world to other countries, other places, and, find out what it's actually like over there and even the history about it, and, have it be part of your transformation and realizing and understanding, you know, compared to what we're taught. And I have a very special guest that I'm excited to have join us today that has done that and experienced some, traumas, but hasn't let it stop him from pursuing his dream, his passion. And please welcome Aaron Bossig.
Hi there. How you
Aaron,
doing?
I'm doing good. It's a pleasure to have you on my show.
Oh, I'm
I
glad to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
I was curious on. I know Stephen Joyner introduced us, and I went and did some research. And you have a very fascinating story, and you've experienced some things that, and started something that now you've been doing for a while.
hmm
And please share with us, a little bit about yourself
Okay.
and what you've been through and what you've overcame as well.
Well, I am currently, let's start at the finish line and work our way back for a minute here. I'm
Okay.
currently the host of a podcast called Hungry Trilobyte, and we focus on a lot of the things that make fandom better and the way that we use things like science fiction and creativity to make life better for people who are writing it, people reading it, people involved in those communities. And how I got here was I was born in Pennsylvania, grew up there, spent most of my life, and then early on after graduation decided I wanted to move to Oklahoma. And long story short, I found myself in Oklahoma with no family, dealing with a family loss at the time, and struggling with career options. And I found that there were people who had a very strong connection to a lot of the things that I cared about, things like Star Trek, video games, board games. And this was more than a fan club. These were communities of people who had formed friendships across a diverse group of interests and backgrounds over something as simple as they liked the same jokes, they enjoyed the same song. And I realized there's something to that. So while I was trying to figure out where I was in the world, I suddenly found out that there was this whole world out there that people were making wherever they wanted to make it. I realized, keep in mind, this was about 2007, 8, 9, when the internet was finally in full swing and people were getting mobile devices, that the internet was its own world, completely apart from the geography of our real world, that was suddenly starting to be, if not more real, more meaningful.
Wow. And, speaking of sci-fi and, Star Trek and whatnot, would it be safe to say, like, when did you discover that that was something that you were passionate about? Of why was it sci-fi? Why is it all about Star Trek and, Star Wars? What is your connection to that?
I have spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it was always something I gravitated toward, even being a kid and watching cartoons, whether that be Star Trek, the animated series, Voltron, Ninja Turtles. These things would be meaningful to me, just the way they were to all the kids, because we had fun with it. But I always insisted there was something important about it. There was a reason to pay attention other than it was fun to do after school. And I always had that idea in my head, but I didn't know where to take it. And it took years of talking to people of going to events like these, of getting into these communities, that I started to look at other people who had taken that next step that I had, and knowing why they did it. And I started to realize, because they would always talk about what they wanted out of that in their real life. When people would say they would watch Star Trek because it showed them the world they wanted to have, it showed them a vision for the future. Or they would talk about Star Wars and they would look at the way that it gave them hope in a situation where their universe seemed hopeless. Or they would look at something like Doctor Who and they would just say, oh, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing this deep friendship, and I could use one of those. And even if I might not have a friend right now, I have faith that it's out there. You see what you want to see, and it almost lets you fill the gaps between what you have and what you think you want to have.
Well, then, Aaron, could it be safe to say that what if there is actually a connection to other highly evolved beings, and they actually have been around since the beginning of our creation? And with Star Trek and Star Wars, they were giving even the movie E.T. You know, what if the person that created that imagined that those storylines, made it into a manuscript and made it into a movie or books? Because I believe Star Wars was 9 series of books before it became a thing in the movie industry. But what if there is some truth that there's other life out there and we're connected to that? And that's why some of us are so drawn to it, because it's like a deja vu, a a connection.
I would love it if that were the case. I don't know enough to say if it is or isn't, but there's a part of me that says that there has to be a reason these are the stories we tell. If you go back 1,000 years and look at the very first stories ever written down, they were stories of fantastic sights. They were stories of monsters, of other beings, of miracles. They were always something you couldn't go out and see in the real world. And there has to be a reason for that. And I don't know if that actually meant that this really happened, but part of me says that it's the answer that makes the most sense in some way. We probably, the details have been obscured, and we probably might even have the meaning wrong. But I feel like there's got to be something that maybe we're missing that draws us to do this.
And well, I could share with you some insight.
Okay.
Is, you know about ancient civilization, and there is a group called the Anunnaki pantheon, and the Sumerian writings from the Northeast that are in cuneiform on tablets that talk. And then if you look at the pyramids that are all around the world, and the drawings and the symbols that they, left behind, that are still there for us to see, I think and believe that there is a connection, that we're not alone. We've been deceived, about UFO sightings and what. Now it's coming out with the disclosure, like, yeah, we're not alone. So there is, to me, there's like truth.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is in us, waiting to be revealed and expressed through us, to help us along our path and journey. And being imaginative, and the with science and spirituality, I feel like they go together, because
Mm-hmm.
we're spiritual beings, sexual beings inside of a human being.
That's
And
one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
there's so many connections. We're connected to everything, including other galaxies, other dimensions, other planets, and highly evolved beings. So I loved Star Trek, because it gave me a creative thought process of, wow, that'd be cool if I could just, hey, Scotty, beam me up. I want to go to this planet. as a kid, I used my imagination. Like, what if that was possible? What if that is actually, there's truth to that? And then you connect it to the Atlanteans, those that are come from the Atlantis, they transported. Even in the Egyptian times, there was transportation going on in machines that have been drawn to describe what they were seeing. So it's like, history is repeating itself in a way. It's just a different time period, different,
Mhm.
era. And I've
Absolutely.
seen UFOs, so I've seen them twice in my lifetime so far.
Mhm.
So when you see that, you just like whatever you're saying, I know the difference. And a lot of times in order to really understand and know, you have to experience it.
Mhm. I've had some chats with people on the topic of paranormal activities and unexplained phenomenon on my show. And I welcome chats from people who have a lot of different perspectives on this, because there's a danger in only talking to the people who see things exactly the way you do. But what I always love to come back to, and what I think is the most important thing, is when you experience something that you can't explain, people want to ignore it, or they want to, trivialize it, but you had the experience. And that's the thing, is that knowing that it happened to you, you can't say that person was a liar, they were a mistake, because you know what happened to you. And you don't even have to say it was a paranormal or supernatural experience. You just have to say, the world is not what I was 5 minutes ago. There's a piece of information I need that I don't have. And that's where the journey starts. That's where you start to imagine the possibilities. And they can be mundane or fantastic. But to get out of the idea that you know everything you need to know is probably the first step everybody needs to take in any journey they want to take.
Well, I like how you put that in perspective. And I've always taught, and I teach on my show is, we're all coming into this earth with limited beliefs, mental programmings, and emotional energetic traumas. And in order for us to awaken and change that, we have to go back to where the root, the origination of when that started. And it's, how can you be your true authentic self when you're believing somebody else's belief and programming that they just passed on to you? And what did you, I guess, when did you have that self-realization or the aha moment? And what was the questions that you started asking to where certain people showed up to help you along your path?
You know, it was a matter of looking at myself and looking at what meant a lot to me in terms of, what I wanted to do with myself. Years ago, being in a retail job you didn't much care for, but it was the thing you could get out of school. And you start to realize, you put all your effort into getting this, shelf stacking job, and man, it feels like there's got to be more to it. And you start to ask yourself, well, if there's more to it for me, there's more to it for everybody else. We have these ideas that we can do more. And then I started to ask myself, what? And, then it came back to, I enjoy these stories. I enjoy seeing how they affect people. I wanted to start having conversations with people about that. And, I'd gone to conventions in high school and one or two in college, but actually being on my own with my own first apartment and a car of my own. And I realized all it takes is a couple days of planning and a tank of gas, and I can find this. It's basically a party for a couple days of people who are getting together and sharing ideas and blowing off some steam over the weekend. And I, that's when it clicked. And there were many friends I met and excuse me.
Wow, this is interesting. And I wonder what his dog looks like. He must be adorable. I'm going to ask him what his dog's name is. I wonder if it's Butch, Duke, Bailey, Marley. Wonder. Ooh, now I'm really curious. We got to find out. What's the dog's name? Or what kind of dog is it? Yeah, let's ask. I think that would be cool. I want to find out where he came up with that name on that podcast. Curious. Trilobite. Hungry Trilobyte. Who would have thought? Okay, so what kind of dog do you have?
She's a beagle mix, actually. Yes.
What's her name?
Paulina.
Paulina. Okay, I would have
Yes.
never guessed that. I'm sitting here talking to the audience. I'm like, okay, so he has a dog. I wonder what kind of dog he has. And what's his name? Is it Butch? Is it Bailey?
No, it's a loving senior dog that gets a little excited. Unfortunately, somebody had to come to the door right then.
Aww.
So I beg your pardon on that.
No, that's okay. I just go with the flow, and I just like, oh, I wonder what kind of dog he has. What's his name? So you were saying that you started going to these conventions for fans media and the sci-fi expos. I guess that's what they call it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when it comes to people I met, that's when I started to realize that these weren't people that were, just going to, buy a couple trinkets and leave. They were getting together because this was a community, because this was something that they were building. And I started thinking, wow, there's got to be more to this. And people will ask me, why do you go? And I said, do you realize almost every time I'm eating dinner with people I didn't know at lunch? And there's nowhere else where you have that instant connection with people.
I agree with you. And it's nice that there's like places like that. And you get it's like this connection, like synchronicities. And it's like a community of where like-minded people get together, and you guys have like mastermind groups, and it's, you could say, okay, this is like, is it a distraction, or is it something that there's more peace? Everyone's getting along. They're sharing ideas, and they're having fun, and they're being in that present moment, having an experience.
And let me ask you, that happened to me a little over 10 years ago. In the past 10 years, it's been striking to me that we've had so many cases where our society is being torn apart, people are separated, we're being divided. All the while, I'm having experiences where we're coming together, and I'm like, there's a dichotomy here. There's got to be a reason I'm seeing this when the world is seeing something completely else. And I start to think, this is more than just a good time. This is like what we need to have to bring the rest of our culture together.
And, during the pandemic, and there's like, people saying, oh, they're trying to, keep us close, separated. And I'm like, look, to be honest and real, there has been religion and politics, government, always in history. If you really want to do some research and find some truth, that's been going along for centuries. It's just repeating history, different time, different period, different era. It's been playing. It's like a full circle, full vicious cycle until we wake up and say, hey, we want to get off this cycle. What can we do differently? And granted, during the pandemic, when all that was going, I feel like it was a time and opportunity for us to take a pause, because we've been so programmed like robots Busy, 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 on the go, go, go. Never taking a time to pause, reevaluate, reinvent ourselves, discover who we are, what we truly want to do.
When
And
you
Zoom went off the Richter scale because that's what everybody said. You weren't disconnecting. You're still not separated. We're just doing it in a different way.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
we're looking.
how did you reinvent yourself during this?
Well, I started to question exactly what my goal was when I created the podcast, not during the pandemic, but just before. And my goal had been to, get together with people. These first couple episodes, I really tried my best to sit face to face with somebody at a table, really have a good time in person. And then when the pandemic hit, in person was like the dirty words you didn't say. You didn't do anything in person. And it was not enjoyable to me to do everything by Skype at first because it just wasn't what I wanted to do. But then I had to sit back and realize, kind of like earlier you said, things happen for a reason. You're being pushed in this direction. Don't let what you think you want get in the way of possibly something better. So I started sitting back and looking at the possibilities I had, who I could reach out to and when and why. And suddenly I started realizing that the show could be it could be an experiment in how I can get in touch with people possibly across the planet. I've talked to people in India and Australia now. And why? Because I wasn't limiting myself to saying it has to be face-to-face. I was starting to take my own advice, which is the crazy thing.
Because when you get in touch with your higher self, Aaron, the answers of the truth reveal itself. It's just you. There's this quote that I found on Instagram or Facebook. I can't remember. Don't be alarmed. Do not be alarmed if you see me talking to myself. I'm getting the best advice.
People would talk to me about creating a podcast, and they always say, what do I need to do? And I would usually say something to the effect of, do whatever you want, as long as it works. If it works for you, it just plain works. But who wasn't listening to me? Me. I was saying, this is what I want. It's got to be this. And if it's not perfect, it doesn't happen. And that was the wrong approach, because I could do something that worked even if it was different. And as soon as I got that into my head, everything changed.
Awesome. And it's like many times, don't you think, like many people just get in their own way? They make so many excuses of why they can't instead of how can I? It's just
exactly
changing a mindset and changing your vocabulary. And it's part of a program that's been passed on for generations.
And as a bigger thing, I think you're on the right track talking about how the pandemic got us to take a pause and look at what we're doing. And there have been so many things that we thought were baked into the very foundation of our world, and that's not the case. People, think that we have to work a certain way, we have to live a certain way, communicate a certain way, shop a certain way, and so little of that actually mattered. I realized this when I went to do the most mundane thing of buying a car. I suddenly found myself needing a car because I got into a wreck. And I hate the experience of buying a car. I do. Because it's designed to waste your time. You go onto a dealership or even just a face-to-face transaction, it always takes a ridiculous amount of time because they figure the longer you're there, the more they can get you to spend. You could not just...
Isn't that a mindset, though?
What's that?
Isn't that a mindset, a program?
Yes, it is. It's exactly a program. And I noticed that, you could never, before the pandemic, get somebody to just sell you a car. Well, I finally need one, called the dealership, found something I liked. And I said, if it doesn't fall apart when I drive it, I'll take it. Guy drove it to my house. Half hour later, I signed the paper. We were done. Because we changed our mindset, because we broke the conditioning that this was the way we did things. And that, I'm glad it happened because, like I said, I hate buying a car. But there's so many other ways we've done that too, where we've broken the idea of this is how we have to do things. And I hope that keeps going long after the pandemic ends.
Oh yeah. It's just, I used to, like, when the pandemic hit, I lost my job, but I started this podcast back in October, and then I had to adjust. I've
Mm-hmm.
learned to, okay, like you said, things happen for a reason. Just be open and flexible and adapt to changes. And I think we're so programmed that, oh, change, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how can you let something new come into your life if you're stuck with the old?
Right.
How can you get new clothes in your closet if you don't get rid of the old ones that you've had there for 6 months to over a year that you're never wearing again?
Apparently,
You
I haven't
haven't
seen my
worn it
closet.
then. Why keep it? It's the same with our programming.
Mm-hmm.
I just so I then I started Instacarting. Because I asked myself, I'm like, okay, I got bills to pay, but it's all in us to help, especially when there's a crisis of some sort. And I find that odd. I'm like, why can't we do that every day? Why do we have to wait for a crisis to happen to unite together and help each other? Why not do it every day?
Mm-hmm.
So I did that as, okay, how can I help others pay my bills and continue my podcast? And then boom, Instacart showed up. I was like, oh, I have flexibility. I can still pay my bills and be a service while I'm waiting for other things to line up. Because sometimes when things do happen and it doesn't quite work out, doesn't mean that we failed. Maybe it wasn't divine timing. We rushed ahead and not pay attention to all the signs of, okay, now take that next step to that goal or that next action that you need to take. And I feel like you paid attention to yourself and asked yourself, then boom, it showed up. It's just synchronization.
100%, 100%. And that's just one example that's easy to pick out here. Just looking at, man, where do I want to be? Where am I going? And, again, I found that one of the best things about what I was doing were the people I'd met along the way over the past 10, 20 years. And, suddenly not able to travel and, people being extra busy. It was the connections I'd lost, I suddenly had to find new ways to make those connections again. And then, if you let yourself be open to it, the universe will provide.
Oh, yeah. And trust in the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
I think we sometimes focus on, well, how are we going to do this? How is this going to happen? Well, if you thought that this is what I want to do, this is what not what I want to do, but you know what? I'd like to experience what it would be like, or this experience to do this. And then how would it feel? Would it look like? Oh, and then once you get that feeling and you can see it, then say, okay, yes, this is what I'm going to do. And then just surrender it to the universe and say, okay, just stay in the now and let it come into the pieces come, the universe providing.
It's frustrating enough.
Amazing.
It's frustrating enough to get locked into a mindset of how you do things with, establishments that have been in place for decades or even centuries, banks and, stores and jobs. But when people get locked into a mindset of things that haven't even been around for a couple of years at this point, when they look at things like streaming and podcasting and online communities, which are very new concepts, we can make them whatever we want. We should not let ourselves get locked into saying how we do things. People come up to me and say, well, what kind of microphone do I need? Or when should I do this? Or what schedule should I be on? Dude, nobody's making the rules for you.
Make your own rules.
Yes. That's the idea. This is empowerment.
Yes.
This is not rules. This is you doing what you want and seeing if the entire world can follow you. Or if not the entire world, just a couple dozen, a couple hundred people who are what you're about. That makes all the difference, because that's what I started seeing, was that there were a few people who were what I was about, and vice versa. And it didn't
Wow.
matter that there's only 10 or 20 or even maybe 100. They were there. And we found the tools to connect ourselves.
Wow. So let me ask you something. Where did you come up with the name for your podcast?
It was I just started asking myself what I wanted to talk about and why. And I picked the hungry part because I thought that people were hungry for content of substance. And, we're used to memes and clickbait and BuzzFeed articles that just give you fluff. And there's so much out there that you can download or watch on TV that is absolutely just meant to be noise in your ears where you go about your day. It is not content of substance. And there's the thought that that's not wanted. I think it is. I think it's definitely wanted. And so there are people out there who are hungry for it. Plus, hungry because, I do like to eat, not going to lie.
You and me both.
Yeah. Trilobite because it's a cute critter, and I like cute critters. It's my dog. And I thought, I'm not the youngest guy out there. I just turned 40, which is not super old, but, there's some gray on the temples here. And I'm talking to people who don't remember life before Twitter. So I started to say, okay, I'm going to call myself a fossil just because I have that perspective of I know where things have come from. I'm not the oldest guy out there again, but perspective is everything. And I want to talk to people who are both older than me and younger than me. And then I decided to just try and change byte to BYTE because it's a technology reference. And that's how I see a lot of these things.
You are very unique, Aaron, and you are very spiritually gifted. You see things that others don't see, and I so relate to that.
Thank you.
It is a gift that you have, and embrace it more.
I'm trying.
It's an amazing journey, and other like spiritual things that most people don't recognize. You're gonna boom, you're mastering it. You're recognizing it, and it's helped. It's helped you along the way with everything you've been through and what you experienced. All it was an experience to help you get to where you are now. You understand a lot more. You have knowledge, wisdom, and you know better now.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy getting here. And again, I'm not where I want to be, but it just became a matter of putting one foot in front of the other.
Right. And what is it that, where you've traveled to?
Mm-hmm.
So where are the places that you traveled to?
Well, I have not yet managed to put myself on another continent. That has gone as far as I can without saying I've done that. But getting to, Hawaii and the Caribbean and Canada and all over the U.S., sometimes, on, cruises, sometimes by flying, sometimes just driving and hoping for the best on a road trip. It's something that's come up quite a bit. And I've made it a part of my show and my journey is that, when you're doing these things, you get to explore the worlds of fiction while you explore the actual world that's underneath you. The actual world has these amazing sights and concepts and cultures that you can experience, all the while, reading stories and that talk about ideas in your mind you can experience and change. And the two should work together. When you read story, reading Greek mythology and looking at the way they're talking about the way the Mediterranean was made, and you can actually see these things. I fantasize about actually getting to see that for myself and putting the stories with the actual soil that made it. The same with Egyptians, the same with anything I could come up with. And I baked it into, when I go somewhere, I try to share that with my Twitter followers as to what I'm doing and why. And if I see something that reflects what I'm thinking about right then. For example, I just on the interstate not too long ago, I pulled over and there was a sign pointing to the local spaceport. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, I live in Oklahoma. You don't necessarily think of space travel when you think of a middle America state, but there actually is a place that you could go if you wanted to try and get off planet. Now, granted, it's kind of hard to use it, but it's there. And I just thought this is so cool. I mean, I'm just going to pull off here where I could be going to a gas station and I could just leave the planet. I just thought that was really cool.
Well, I like that you're a visionary too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's fascinating. And yeah, I've read, and seen documentaries. Yeah, documentaries of, like you say, Greece and, the um with Zeus and all of them, those Greek gods. Someone's like, oh, it's just a myth. And I'm like, no, that shit happened. They don't want you to, you know, that all changed when religion got involved. But those were real people. Those were people that wrote things about what they witnessed, what they experienced with these so-called gods. And then the Egyptians, and then there's, Ireland, and then Scotland, and then there's Russia, then there's Peru, and all these places. I've never been out of this continent either, but I always wondered, I see the documentaries, I see things, pictures and posts, and I'm like, wow, that would be so cool if I could go and see it for myself and really experience it, what it's like there. Now, granted, you've been in all parts of the U.S. and Canada and whatnot, but what did you discover and see in all those places, and the mindsets of others, and the culture and the history of the places that you've been to?
I think one of my favorite experiences, it actually happened not too long after I moved to Oklahoma. I just decided to, long story short, I decided to just take one first road trips into Texas. Again, I had just moved across the country. I was barely unpacking from setting up my first apartment. I get an invite to go down to see a show at the Alamo Draft House in Austin, which was about, I'm going to say, a 6-hour drive. And, at the time, driving 6 hours just to see a movie was a silly idea for me. But it's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to have a great time. And that was the first time I spent any great amount of time in Texas. And I just seeing a neighboring state, looking at the scenery, looking at this amazing movie theater that had this awesome concept where they were talking about showing classic movies and having sing-alongs, and there was a community. And this stuff might seem a little more common today, but this was almost 15 years ago to me at this point.
Oh, wow.
And I realized, this has to be an idea, is that you can. And then, I've always been the kind of person that I will pull over to see the little tourist traps, the world's biggest frying pan, the best pie in the world. Like, I am the kind of person who wants to do that. So when I realized, okay, now wait a minute, now there's this barbecue joint I have to try out, and oh my Lord, there's a museum here about, and I'm like, and that's how I plan trips, and how I've started doing it ever since then. It's like, okay, I have my goal is to go do this, but this is what I can eat, and this is who I can meet, and these are the sites I can see. And I have found all sorts of things. Like, not too long after that, ended up taking a quick trip to Las Vegas and went to a classic gaming convention where I start to see historical artifacts from video games from 30 years ago, which nobody goes to Vegas to see that. I did. And why not? Wow. Because it was there.
I love history. I went to Vegas, and I stayed at the, oh my gosh, the Grand, oh my God, it has the lion on it, and I just had a brain fart. Something Grand Hotel. They had the Circus Soleil or something like that performing. Oh my God, it's oh shit.
Grand, yeah, the MGM Grand.
MGM, yeah, there you go. Duh.
Okay.
But I also went to it starts with the one of the oldest, I guess, hotels that were still operating. I don't know if it still is now, because this is like way back. But they had the history of Marilyn Monroe, and then, Dean Martin, Sam Harris, and Frank Sinatra, and,
The
even
Sands.
and Elvis Presley. They had these pictures and they had these artifacts of them. And I'm like, and I felt like being intuitive, I could feel energy and spirits. And I'm like, okay, there's like so many of you. I don't know who's who or who, which one is which.
Hmm.
But I was like, wow, I was actually there. And it was like in my mind's eye, I was replaying certain things that I remember seeing when they were at that hotel, and what it was like back then. And is that like the same kind of thing that you experience when you go to these places?
I love to have that kind of feeling. Knowing that I am standing at the same place as a certain general before they were in a battle, or sitting at the same bar as a certain musician before they went on stage. And that's the thing about history, is it doesn't have to be about one thing. Some people say they don't like history. How can you not? Because if you like something, you like history. It's just a matter, you probably like the history of that thing, and that's okay. You can like the history of football. You can like the history of cocktails. You can like the history of your hometown. That's okay. Just start soaking up the knowledge, because once you do, you'll make connections to the way things have been, and the way things could be going that you never saw before.
Or how to make it better, because
Mm-hmm.
history leaves clues. It is part of our past of things that didn't work out because, back then they didn't know better. They didn't know what that we know now. If they
Mm-hmm.
would have known what we know now, they probably wouldn't have made that decision.
No.
So that's life though. Just to have an experience and then get better, be better, do better. Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree, because I made the reference before about standing in a field where a general select. I am actually very familiar with the battlefield where General Custer used to keep his campground. Definitely somebody who made some bad decisions, both in his time and in the grand scheme of things. And at the same time, I can go drive a couple more hours and I can find the admittedly fictional birthplace of Captain Kirk. Now,
Oh,
it's not that I'm saying the two equate to each other, but I am saying, we can look at these things and we can say, okay, we can say this is going to be this. People came together and they said, we want to commemorate the idea of this person. This person doesn't actually exist. We want to make a monument to what we want out of this. Isn't that a, I'm not going to say it redeems some of the mistakes people have made in the past, but it shows we're capable of growth. It
yeah.
shows we're capable of saying we're going to commit ourselves to, like you say, doing better. And that's what this is all about for me, is saying we're going to find a goal, and we might not know how we're going to get there, but we can start to come up with ideas, and we might go through iterations of ideas. We might have an original idea, and then a next generation of that idea. And, okay, pardon the pun there, but that was on purpose. And we're just going to keep working at it. And knowing where we came from is important.
You mentioned about Captain Kirk, and he just went, Tom Shatner, he went to space and came back, and he was just I cried watching that and having that experience, playing Captain Kirk. But I knew, I talked to Laura Banks, who was on another part of Star Trek with the Wrath of Khan. And, she shared something that was like very profound. And I was like, wow, I never really, I watched Star Trek, and then the Wrath of Khan, and even with Captain Kirk, there was, there was a Black, there was an Asian, there was even a Scotland, all diverse variety of human beings on this TV show. And I was like, wow, they're uniting, they're working together. And I was like, and they're going places. supposedly, and they're meeting other beings, and come on, Captain Kirk was kissing all kind of aliens.
Hmm.
So it was, I don't want to say alien, extraterrestrial, but it's like, wow, what if that's actually possible that we all can do that
That's
and
right there.
connect?
It's not just that you recognize it, but that you said just what if that's actually possible? You just made the step to the next a little bit closer to the goal than you were a couple minutes ago when you said what if that's actually possible. And what I always love to point out as soon as they look at the diversity, I said, yeah, they were diverse in appearance, but more importantly, they were diverse in thought because they didn't all think the same. They don't have the same beliefs. They came from different backgrounds, but they looked at what they wanted to accomplish and they said, we can pool our resources. We can make this work. And they didn't end up being, those differences remained. They weren't erased, but they were respected.
And now it's like, what? It's just, more of the programming that keeps us separated. And to me, it's just nonsense. We're all connected.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
And
When we stop realizing that is when the problems really start.
yeah. What about me, 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 me? No, it's what about we? We. What can we do to work together? We're always focusing on the problem, but we're never focusing on the solution.
Mm-hmm. Or even worse, we're convinced that somebody else is the problem. That we don't have a problem with the system, we have a problem with this group of people. And that's, we just always keep picking a different group of people. That's the problem. As soon as one group finally stands up for themselves, we're just going to find a different group. And that's how the game keeps.
Yeah. It's like once you get to the root, yeah, there's a lot of systems that, okay, perfect example. The Constitution that was written in 1776, that is outdated. Hello, it was written for those times. They didn't really think about the future generations, 100 years later. And they were putting what was going on in that moment, in that time, into writing. And that's part of a system that's actually outdated and broken. And there's a lot of other systems that are out there. What can the people that are in office, and get together and say, okay, this is really outdated. This is like from the early 1900s. We need to do something to better humanity for it to be an all win for everybody. And it just shifts things. It changes things for the better. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree. And there was a very famous quote, I'm blanking on who said it, but you said you can't expect somebody to wear the same clothes in their 20s they wore when they were 8. And that was directly talking about the Constitution. Is that it's not that it was bad, it's just that it was not meant to be the end. That's why we have amendments. I mean, that's just the historical background of how it came to be, is that it was never written to be the final word. And I think that there are so many other things that aren't even as old as the Constitution, which is itself not super old in the grand scheme of things. We have these ideas that you have to, that you're, excuse me, about, how you have to structure your career, how you have to structure your neighborhoods, how you have to structure, how you interact on, with your neighbors. And it's like, that's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be written in stone. And that's what I don't understand. It's like, if we can do something better, why don't we? Let's not wait for something. Let's not wait for a pandemic to happen. Let's not wait for a natural disaster. And that's because that's the thing. We always want to change when something really bad happens. We're willing to wiggle then, but why do we have to wait for that? How many changes have come about because we got involved in wars? A ton. And a lot of them were good, but why do we have to get to that point?
Yeah, it's unnecessary. It's history repeating itself. Emotional, energetic traumas. and between war, religion, and even government. If you go back in history, and what I found fascinating when I first started my podcast, I found these Hammurabi Code of Laws. There's
Hmm.
close to 300, but 200, I believe 282 was able to be translated. And when I started looking into it, I'm like, wait a minute, there's a connection. But who was reigning prior to him and what laws were? So I even went back further, and there was two, three other ones that reigned before Imbarambi came in. And they were considered lords or kings. And I find it fascinating, like, how did they know about wages back then, or even property taxes back in those times? We're
Those
going
are.
95,000 years. How
Mhm.
did they know how to, you know? Oh, and there was physicians back then that got paid. But with Amber Romby, he categorized the three groups. The property owner, the commoner, there was the employee, and then there were slaves. Women had no voice, no right to anything. There was like a male dominant kind of time period. And and I'm like, oh, this explains a lot why women were treated the way they were, but I was fascinated. I'm like, how did they come up with that idea about the wages, the property taxes, the physicians' wages, and all this, the agriculture stuff, for fishermen and they call it maritime,
Mhm.
and all this. I'm like, they didn't think about this on themselves. Somebody had to help them. It was even further back. It's mind-boggling and fascinating. I was like, oh, so this explains a lot about our history, but
Mhm.
it's not talked about.
No.
And I think if we could go back just to say, okay, how can we stop having history repeat itself and these emotional, energetic traumas that keep coming? It's like with the pandemic, if you look at it, and I do believe Laura Banks, she mentioned it. She goes, when the coronavirus kicked in, it happened at the same time of the planets when the Spanish influenza flu happened. I
That's
find that
fascinating.
out. Yes. I was like, what? So the stars and everything were in line when the Spanish influenza happened. It's the same thing when the coronavirus happened. So that tells me history does repeat itself if we didn't figure it out the first time. And there was other pandemics and plagues prior to that. If you look at the time periods, every 100 years it was going on. I'm like, okay, so what did we not learn? What's the connection to this? How can we avoid having these kind of things happen? These are the questions I ask.
Mhm. And if we
Do you
were to be able to
agree?
avoid this, what would the gain be? I'm not being sarcastic. I'm actually wondering if we suddenly didn't have to worry about this, how much more could we gain from our lives? Like
Oh my
we
God.
have.
Peace, love, harmony.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
Everybody getting along.
Like we're just
What?
now in a, like people talk about not having disease, for example, and that's definitely seems far fetched. I'm not. Don't get me wrong, but we're just now after thousands of years getting to a point where we can say we might be getting past the point where scarcity is an issue. We might be in a situation where it's economical to just give everybody everything they need, and you don't have to worry about that. And that, what does that mean? What could that bring? We never had to think about that before. We're a species that spent 10,000 plus years never being sure we'd have enough food. Tomorrow that could stop being an issue. You can't change that kind of thought process overnight, but where's it going to lead when you do?
Well, because of the some systems that were in place and a mindset and a program, it's I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were talking about, yeah, the government, everybody, you know, the government's going to rescue us. The government, and it's like, no, the government's not going to rescue me. I'm not going to be dependent on the government. If I'm going to do anything, it's up to me. And yes, do my research and choose the ones that are on the same page as me for better humanity, for the better of the planet. And with what's going on with this division, even in the politics, I'm like, you know what? Every politician is going to start getting along. Every politician is going to start working together. Every politician is going to provide a way where it's a win-win for all mankind and this planet that I live on. I'm putting and speaking and feeling the experience and what I want to see come to pass.
And that's something that if you talk to a lot of people, they'd say, you're dreaming, you're naive. There's no way that could happen. And maybe today they're right. But the fact that you can imagine it, when what you just said might be as unbelievable as traveling faster than the speed of light or teleporting or flying unaided, I mean, you just had an idea, and that is all it takes.
Because it's a better solution to think this way than what's been playing on over and over and over between the division and the arguing and the fighting between the politicians. I'm like, okay, that we're just focusing on the problem between those two not getting along. So why not speak into existence of what it would be like for them all getting along and working together? And solving the problem to where it's a win-win, creating the solution of a win-win for all.
And why is it a radical idea if actually solving the problem is even talked about, instead of just saying the problem exists and this person's going to blame this person and that person's going to blame this person? Instead of saying we're going to stop the blame, we're just going to solve the problem. Why is that radical?
It's a program. It's been taught for centuries. For centuries.
And to be fair to us, when you're stuck in this life that you go to work and you go to school and you take care of you scrub the floors and you do the stuff that you got to do. I'm not saying you don't got to do it, because the floors have to get clean and the trash has to get taken out. But when you're in that world, you don't have the time to sit and think, man, how could we solve all the problems? How could we make the world better? There's so much energy you have to dedicate to that. And then suddenly something comes along and you say, okay, but I'm getting the chance to do some imagining. I'm getting the chance to do some planning, to do some dreaming. It's not wasted.
No. But see, when you can tap into that imagination, you're actually tapping into a divine greater intelligence, a source, and the energy that is already in you. And I balance my time of how much news I watch. I try not to see it, because it's programming. Your eyes are like a camera lens recording everything. So what are you putting into this up here? More programming? It's going to take a lot more work to unprogram and rewire the brain of all that stuff that is deep down in your subconscious.
Good point.
So I like to read. I'll read some news updates, and every now and then I'll see what's, like I enjoyed watching Shatner, go to the space and come back and share his experience. That to me is positive.
And if you're going to seek out the news and know what's going on, I mean, it's so difficult to know what can be trusted. I mean, that part of the argument we always have is what do we know is real and not? And
What is truth
That's
and what is not?
right.
Okay. So here's a suggestion.
I'm listening.
Because I do this. It's the truth's inside us. Now, when I hear and see truth, I feel it. So my question is, well, why not you? Why can't you? Why can't the rest of us also discern that? Feel the truth.
So you're saying you look at what's presented and you go on feeling as to which is accurate.
Yeah, I ask the question.
Okay.
I question everything. And then when something doesn't, like, if I'm not feeling anything, I'll be like, interesting. And then I will ask a question to lead me to the truth. That's where discernment comes in. But we think that the media, not all media is honest. Not all media is, honest. They're there. Their job is to tell a story. I went to school for Connecticut School of Broadcasting, and I had to be a reporter. That was part of my homework assignment. And I had to create this story of what was going on and how to create a story to present it to the audience. So I learned some valuable information of how the news is done. And then they give you the visual of little clips, only pieces. Now I look at it, okay, I'm getting pieces of information, not necessarily the whole truth, but it's my responsibility to seek out the truth based on what's being said or what I'm seeing. So now I just become an observer, a researcher, and an investigator into the truth.
And the tool that you and I have now as podcasters is one of the best uses of the internet that's ever been, because this gives you the ability as a person, as an individual, as a certain soul, to get your word out from your perspective to anybody who wants it. And that's amazing. You're not a corporation. You're not a brand. You are a person who can have an opinion, right or wrong. That's okay. But you can just get it out there and people can have that talk. And you could be giving somebody on the other side of the planet your perspective on anything. And that has value. That's so new to us. Excuse me.
Well, there you go. Ding dong. Oh my gosh, that's too funny. I enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too. And I left a description for you to reach out if you're into that fan media, sci-fi, and you want to connect to Aaron. Go ahead. There's a link to connect with him and enjoy. Have fun. I was just
I'll beg your pardon again.
That's okay. I was just sharing with the audience of how they can connect with you. I put a link, your link tree.
Thank you.
That has all your information for those sci-fi, fans and fan media. The community that wants to connect and expand to connect with you in that aspect. Go right ahead and enjoy and have fun. And just be the best version of you. And, when you can connect to something that is joyful, happy, pleasing, pleasurable, that's an expression of love. And then you can share it because it expands. It doesn't constrict. There's no limit. There's no restrictions. There's no rules.
Exactly.
When we can all be the best version of ourselves, we can be authentic. And we can start living our best lives now.
Mm-hmm. And if I do appreciate you putting those links out there. Anybody who's listening to this is obviously an open-minded person who wants to consider different ideas. I would love to hear about your journey. So if you decide to give me a listen, I would be honored, and I would like to have your feedback So any emails or tweets you want to send my way, I totally welcome them. And I thank you so
Oh,
much.
wait. Ah, I wanted to put something up for everybody. And let's see. Oh, I want to put, can they email you as well?
Absolutely. You can email me at bossigpodcast@yahoo.com. Tweet me at Aaron Bossig.
Bossig Podcast at Yahoo. That would be easier if I could just put that up for everybody. And
there you go.
There you go. The email's down below too. You know what? I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
I did as well. This has been great.
Thank you
so much for having me. Gladly, I did.
Well, this is what I like talking about. Just like a natural flow, nothing scripted, just going with it, and I hope this has helped, the audience listening. I hope this helped you, Aaron. And hey, if you want some coaching advice, you got my number, buddy.
I will keep that in mind. Absolutely. And I will keep in touch with you as well.
Definitely. I love it. I love meeting new friends.
Consider me a friend, please.
I do. Thank you again.
Anytime.
It's a pleasure to meet you finally.
Likewise.
Well, there you go. Sci-fi and so much more with Aaron. You got to go check out his podcast and just check out everything that he has to share with you on his link that I provided below. And you never know who I'm going to get on my show. Got to stay tuned with Wake Up with KC. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Do you agree that, it's time that we all wake up and take responsibility, even for our ancestors that did not know any better?
Been waiting patiently to have this kind of conversation.